Amen. Solomon, writing the book of Ecclesiastes, dealing with some of the philosophies of life, especially when it comes to what the point of human life is all about. What is the purpose of life? And one of the things that is dealt with in the book is the purpose of the accumulation of wealth, the accumulation of material things. And these are great lessons for us to learn, especially because it comes from a man who had a tremendous amount of wealth, a tremendous amount of resources, and understood firsthand how that those things do not bring an ultimate fulfillment to one's life. And so from that perspective we learn a lot. Also because of the amount of wealth that we have, especially in this country. We need to look at our wealth in a biblical perspective, because if you look at wealth from a humanistic perspective, which the concept of under the sun is dealing with, then what kind of outlook will you have in life? From their point of view, exactly. The more you get, the happier you are, but then you can't take it with you, and you can't get there, because there's never enough. Because if your happiness is caught up in the amount of material things that you have, you'll be happier if you get more. So if you are happy to a certain extent at this level right now, if you got a little more, you'd be happier. You see? And that's why he says there in verse 10 of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. And we looked at these verses last week, verse 11. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? Verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. Now you think about that on a practical level. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 12, someone who works hard at the end of the day, you get out, you put in a lot of effort into whatever you're doing, whether it's mental effort in studying, or whether it's physical labor in a physical job, that sleep is sweet. You look forward to going to sleep. It's sweet to you to be able to rest. However, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. Now think about that. He might have a multi-million-dollar mansion, the dream master bedroom. He might have, you think about whatever bathroom that you would want, ladies, the perfect bathroom that you would want. You think about the perfect bed that you would want, what it would look like. The perfect mattress, the perfect comfort, the perfect sheets on it. And yet, why would you not be able to sleep? You're too concerned about it. You're too concerned about it. How many people have an abundance of things, but they're worrying about losing it? Very good. Constantly investing in stocks. They're watching the stock market. How is it going to go? Am I going to lose money? Am I going to gain money? Those things that a person might be focused on. It won't permit them to sleep. But the person who's right with God, what do they say? Come what may, if I abound or if I'm in poverty, I'll be okay. And so they have that peace, and they can relax, and they can sleep at night, And it doesn't matter if it's all taken away or you get twice as much as you have now. Yes?
Wouldn't it be okay for, as a Christian, to pray for wealth that you had in mind that you wanted more financial income in order to help further the church?
I think so. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think praying for wealth, if your goal is to use it to the glory of God, I don't think there's any problem with that. God blesses people with wealth. He blessed Solomon with wealth. Abraham was a wealthy man. So there's nothing wrong with that. Job was a wealthy man. And then after the end of his trials, he was blessed even more, twice as much, towards the end of his life. So to pray for that with the end goal in mind, to use it to the glory of God, with this understanding that whatever I have right now, I'm going to use it to the glory of God. You know, if someone has the attitude, well, when I get to that $10 million mark, then I'll start serving the Lord and using that money to the glory of God. No, He wants you to use what you have right now, if it's just $10. He wants you to use that $10 to the glory of God. And that's something that we need to keep in mind.
There was a friend of ours that said that one of the professors asked him, what would you do with $1 million? He got $1 million. One of his taxes every year was dead
Mm-hmm.
in college. And he expressed whatever you would do. Everybody had these big grand, I would do this and I would do that. And goes, you're not doing it now.
Right.
Will not do it much.
That's a very good point.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's a very good point. That's like the person who says, you know, when I get this good paying job and start getting my bills paid and get out of debt, I'm going to start giving to the church. No. If you're making $10 a week and you're not giving some of that to the Lord on the first day of the week, you're not going to do it if you make $10 million.
Like the man give less.
Right. They'll give less or not at all. So you've got to be faithful with what you have and use it to the glory of God. So a lot of people who have an abundance do not have a peace of mind, and there are the people that are hardworking workers that labor and their sleep is sweet to them. And whether he eats much or little, he can sleep at night peacefully because this person is putting God first and doing what's right. Whereas a person who's focused on their abundance of riches, their wealth will not permit them to sleep. It's like when people lose it all, sometimes they'll end their life because their life was all wrapped up in their wealth.
There's always that fear that they're going to get caught.
Right.
Because the dishonesty. I know sometimes that it's not the case. When you really think about these guys that big people with lots and lots of money in the sense that, are they drug related? Are they, what kind of laws have they twisted to their advantage?
Right.
And will they get, are they going to get caught? Versus somebody who follows the rules and they don't ever have much, but they gained it honestly.
Right. On honest wealth up against something that is gained dishonestly. Yeah, you can't have peace of mind if it depends on how hard your heart is too, and even if your heart is hardened, you still don't have that peace of mind that what you got was from an honest endeavor rather dishonest, because you're always afraid you're going to get caught, you're going to get found out. So there's no peace there. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't know, never heard anything about, or I didn't, the charities that he may have given to. What did he do with his money?
Mm-hmm.
Did he do it?
Right. So if the focus, and it's dealing with focus, it's dealing with what you put your focus on. Verse 13 through the end of the chapter is dealing with this as well, materialism. There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. So here is the person that is focused on their abundance. And he says it's a severe evil, verse 13. They have seen under the sun. These are riches kept for their owner to his hurt. And immediately comes to mind the rich young ruler, Mark chapter 10. We talked about that last week. The rich young ruler who walked away sorrowfully because Jesus knew what was his problem, and that was covetousness. He coveted material things, his own material things. And he told him to sell it all, give to the poor, take up your cross, and follow me. And he went away sorrowful. And so that was riches that he kept to his own hurt. It hurt his soul because he was very wealthy. Being willing to give up everything that you have. I mean, you think about that when it comes to what if that was asked of us? You give up your cell phone, you give up your internet, you give up your air conditioning, you give up the comforts of this life and live basically on a poverty level for the Lord. Sell it all. Don't keep the money for yourself. Sell it all and distribute that money to the poor, and then live on a poverty level for the Lord and trust that you will be taken care of. That is something that would be a hard pill to swallow for us as Americans. Because we got to have our air conditioner. We got to have our internet. We got to have our Facebook. Or do we? See, our problems is our luxuries have become our necessities. That's our problem. Our luxuries have become our necessities, and we need to distinguish between the two. Riches, verse 14, but those riches perish through misfortune. That can also be translated bad business. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. He brings his son into the world. He has nothing. He shall go out of this world with nothing. So whatever inheritance you leave for your children, they're not going to take it with them either. They come into the world with nothing. Whatever inheritance you might have to give to them, they're going to leave this world without it. And he says in verse 16, this also is a severe evil, just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? See, there's the focus. They labored for the wind, grasping after the wind. What do you have to show for it? What do you have to show for it at the end of your life? Who was it that invented Apple computer? I forgot. He died recently. Jobs. Jobs died a couple years ago now. It's been not long ago. He had, I don't know how many billions of dollars. Very, very wealthy. Worked hard to get it. But he was a Buddhist. And as a Buddhist, that means he denied Christ. And so he died outside of Christ. What does he have to show for it now? What does he have to show for it? I mean, that's a sad reality. Look at verse 18 through 20. Here's what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for this is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. Verses 18 through 20, he is telling us the proper perspective of things, realizing that it's a gift from God. Your labor in this world is a gift from God. And that's why it's important for us to teach our children to get out and get a job, get out and work in the workplace. There's a lot of life lessons that are learned out in the workplace. Learning those things. And it's a good thing. God created man to labor. In Genesis chapter 2, we find in the creation of man and woman that they were placed in the Garden of Eden to till it, to take care of it, to tend to it. That's before the fall. That's when everything was still perfect. So man was created to work, not to be idle, but to work, to be laboring. And when a person does that with a proper perspective, it is very rewarding. When a person does that with a godly attitude, they have that peace of mind. They have that reality that what they're doing is something that is pleasing to the Lord, and it has eternal consequences that are a blessing. You tie this in with Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. Jesus said, "Do not lay up for yourself treasure on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Where your treasure is. Do you treasure spiritual things, or do you treasure material things? If you treasure material things, you will never be satisfied. Because those material things, if that makes you happy, and the more you get, the happier you are, you'll always need more to be happier. And so there's that endless cycle of I need more to be happier. But if you treasure spiritual things, then no matter what you have, you'll be happy. No matter what you have. Because you know that it cannot be taken away from you, cannot be stolen from you. You know that it won't decay, it will not rust, it will not be destroyed. It's eternal in the heavens. And therefore, come what may, once we pass through this life, we're going on to something better, and it will be for eternity. And the new never wears off. I make all things new. Revelation chapter 20 and 21. And it's something that is to be enjoyed forever. And when you have that perspective of things, then your attitude towards riches will be very, very different. That's why it's very interesting. Surveys have shown that people who are conservative-minded in our nation, conservative-minded and religiously oriented, give more to charities than the liberal democratic mindset does. Than a lot of celebrities and a lot of those who are on the left side of philosophy that hate the Bible and hate everything that has to do with the Bible. They consider themselves the lovebirds and consider all of us as bigots because we are against homosexuality and because we want to approve of it and stuff like that. However, the stats show that those who are religiously oriented and conservative in their mindset are the best givers. One at a time, please. Ladies first.
I was going to say that a lot of the liberal-minded people will give to charity in order to get like tax cut-offs
Yeah.
and stuff, so they get more of their riches and get to save them. So
Exactly.
anyway.
There are strings attached to their giving, and a lot of it's because of notoriety, and they want the pat on the back. They want a plaque on the wall, or a recognition of some sort. So, and that should affect our giving upon the first day of the week as well. One of the crises that we find in churches of Christ nowadays is a lack of giving to the Lord's church. And, the Bible addresses that in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Beginning in verse 6, Paul says, 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 6, "But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver." He talks about how that our giving is something that will be a blessing. Then he ties it in with the greatest gift of all in verse 15. "Thanks be to God for His indescribable gift." I don't believe it is an accident or a coincidence that God put our giving on the same day we remember the greatest gift of all in the Lord's Supper. I think that was part of God's design, because we think about what God has given to us materially, spiritually, of course, the ultimate sacrifice of Christ, and then that should motivate us to be very liberal in our giving to the Lord's cause. So when we have this proper attitude, we can enjoy life because we know that it is a gift from God. Back to Ecclesiastes 5, verses 18 through 20. And you see that he understands that this indeed is a gift from God. He says it in verse 18, he calls it a heritage that is from God. And he says God has given riches and wealth in verse 19 to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. And then in verse 20 it talks about God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. So it's the God-focused mindset. Being focused on God and His will, and then you can enjoy what you do because you know ultimately you're serving the Lord in everything that you do. Before we go into chapter 6, anything else about chapter 5 and the attitude towards riches? He's going to continue that thought in chapter 6. A lot said about our attitude towards riches and the concept of how it is to be used in the scheme of things. He says in verse 1, "There is an evil which I have seen under the sun. It is common among men." There's that concept, under the sun, humanistic viewpoint. It's common among humanity. Verse 2, "A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all that he desires, yet God does not give him the power to eat of it, but a foreigner comes in. This is vanity and also an evil affliction." Oh, there's that unfairness again. He talked about it earlier. Sometimes life is unfair. "Blesses him with riches and wealth and honor. He lacks nothing, yet he doesn't have the power to eat of it, because someone else comes in. A foreigner comes in and consumes it." You could be robbed by no fault of your own of the wealth, the honor, the riches that you have. And therefore, there's that unfair factor that we have to face in this world. And Solomon talks about under the sun. This is what happens in our world. It's vanity and also an evil affliction. Then in verse 3 he says, if a man begets 100 children, lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. For it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and his name is covered with darkness. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this has more rest than that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice, that'd be 2,000 years, by the way, but has not seen goodness, do not all go to one place? Now, Solomon could have easily have had 100 plus children. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, so you just do the math on that one. And I'm trying to think which judge it was. Was it Jephthah that had 70 children? One of the judges had like 70 children. I think it might have been Jephthah. And it says, so his days and years are many, but notice this, his soul is not satisfied with goodness. What does it mean to be satisfied with goodness? Contentment. Contentment with what? What is good? Where does that come from? God. So contentment with goodness, and goodness comes from God. That's contentment with spiritual things. Rich toward God. As Jesus talked about in Luke chapter 12, the rich fool. So is he who is wealthy in this world and not rich toward God. The rich fool who was going to tear down his barns, build bigger barns, had all these plans, but he had no concept of the goodness of God. Luke chapter 12. Let's go ahead and look at that because it ties in so perfectly. Luke chapter 12. The parable of the rich fool. Verse 15, Jesus said, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things which he possesses." That's what Solomon's been talking about. He spoke a parable to them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully, a blessing from God. He thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no rooms to store my crops?" Got so much you don't know where to put it. So he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater barns. There I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." Not a consideration of God or the goodness of God in any of that. Verse 20, "But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." And that's the same concept that Solomon is dealing with in chapter 6. Now, what was considered a blessing from God and a rich wealth and honor from God? To have a multitude of children. To have a bunch of children. In that culture, you have a bunch of children. That's a blessing from God. Then it talks about also these things along with the riches and wealth and honor. There in Ecclesiastes 6 and verse 3. "But his soul is not satisfied with goodness." That's like the rich fool of Luke chapter 12. His soul wasn't satisfied with the goodness of God. He was focused on the material. And that's why God called him a fool. You're going to have to give account of your life. Your soul is required of you this night. He was not rich toward God. He laid up treasure for himself, but was not rich toward God. He was not satisfied with the goodness of God. And he has no burial. In the ancient culture, a place to be buried was a very important thing. That's why Abraham sought out, was it Machpelah? Cave of Machpelah, to bury Sarah in. It was very important to have a burial plot to bury your dead in. And this person has no burial. He says, I say that a stillborn is better than he. Stillborn, that would be a child born dies before it's born. He says in verse 4, for it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness. The child never had a life. And though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this has more rest than that man. This also goes along with the rest of the concept of a child that dies in innocence has more rest than a man who lives his life, has honors, riches, and wealth, but is not focused on the goodness. His mind is not set upon and satisfied with the goodness of God. That little stillborn child has rest more than that man in the next life. So there is something there to be said of children, their innocence. There's something there to be said of people think that the child misses out. Well, if the child doesn't corrupt himself like this wealthy person did, then they are not missing out in the long run. This has more rest than that man. Verse 6, even if he lives 1,000 years twice, 2,000 years, but has not seen goodness. Do not all go to one place. That one place, of course, is the grave. Ecclesiastes 2, 14 and 15. That's where we all wind up, in the graveyard. So if you could live for 2,000 years, who's the oldest man recorded in the Bible? How old did he live? 969 years, oldest recorded person in the Bible. You could do that twice. You could live 1,000 years twice. But you have not seen goodness. What does that accomplish? We all wind up in the one place, in the grave. So he's looking at things, again, from under the sun perspective. God blesses a person with these riches, wealth, and honor when someone comes in and takes it. That's not fair. But yet this little child is dead before it has a life, which seems to be unfair, but yet that little child has more rest than the man who has riches, honor, and glory in this life. So the way things seem is not always the way things are. We find that throughout the Psalms, Psalm 37, Psalm 73, that deal with the unfairness of life. So this is dealing with how things are, and sometimes the way things are perceived are not exactly how things are from God's perspective. We always should be looking at things from God's perspective from the Bible. Yes.
Does this apply to like I think of James 1:17 where it comes down every good gift comes
Mm-hmm.
from above. And when I understand that, those good perfect gifts are things like marriage, family.
Right.
Perfect things that God gave mankind.
Right.
That we have today. And yet in today's society, marriage is a burden. Children are a burden.
Mm-hmm.
They're a problem. They get in my way. They're expensive. So that's money I can't spend on me because I've got to tend to them, or like I said, they're a problem. They get in trouble or whatever. And it's this mindset of, either, I don't want kids, or I only want to have one.
Right.
And it'll be later after my wife and I enjoy traveling and all this other stuff. This mindset of that family and children, or marriage even, because some people don't even want to get married. We'll just live together because it's, you get married, you have to deal with the IRS and your taxes and all that. It's just a burden. And yet those are the good and perfect gifts that came from.
The homosexuals want to get married.
They're trying to straighten up. I'm sorry.
But sorry, I had to throw that in there. It's funny how normal people don't want to get married, and those who are abnormal in their desires want to get married. You know what all that's for? Money. That's all for money. Because they can already live together and do whatever they want. It's for money. That's what that's for. I back off or I'll get on my soapbox. But I see what you're saying. Those things are gifts from God, but people see that as a burden that's hindering them, holding them back. Things like that. Right. You look at things differently when your mind is filled with the Bible. I mean, it's just a different outlook and perspective on life. And when you're around people of the world, it's just you're in a whole other realm than they are when it comes to things. And they just don't understand, they understand certain virtues and certain goodness that's to their advantage, that will help them out in their life. But they don't believe in being good for goodness sake because it's right to be good all the time. It's right to be good so you won't get caught being bad in their minds a lot of time. I better behave at work because I don't want to be caught being bad, because that could be detrimental to my career. Whereas they would be bad all they wanted to if they didn't get caught.
That reminds me of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who perish,
Mm-hmm.
but to us who are being saved is power of God. Just don't
Exactly.
get it because they don't want to get it. They don't want to have God in their lives. So
Right.
everything is going to be an annoyance unless it's directly profiting them.
Exactly. And that's selfishness. That's self-centeredness. Whereas a Christian is God-centered. Everything that we do, we think, how is this going to fit in with me serving God? Whether it's a career, whether it is entertainment, whether it is something or other that we do, we always say, how is this going to fit in ultimately to serving God? And what we learned from the Fishers of Men course is, how can we turn this into a Bible study? How can we ask these questions even if we're at the grocery store, even if we're at a restaurant, or even somewhere, and turn this into a Bible study? That's using everyday things to get people interested in the Bible. So all these things have a purpose of causing us to look at the perspective of life. And are we looking at it from a under the sun perspective, a humanistic perspective, or a godly perspective? Then with a few minutes we have remaining, verses 7 through 12 of Ecclesiastes 6. All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the soul is not satisfied. For what more has the wise man than the fool? What does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Look at verse 10. Whatever one is, he has been named already. For it is known that he is man, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. Some believe the him there is referring to God. That's why they capitalize the H. It might be referring to God. Verse 11. Since there are many things that increase vanity, how is man the better? Verse 12. For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? And who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? Tie that in with James chapter 4 and verse 14. Our life is like a vapor. It's like a shadow, just appears for a while in the grand scheme of things. Now, this will bring us into chapter 7, in which we have kind of some answers to the question of verse 12, for who knows what is good for a man in his life? Well, and then chapter 7, Solomon's going to answer some of the good things. A good name is better than precious ointment. It's better to hear rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. Sorrow is better than laughter. Better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. And so those are some of the things that we're going to see answered in chapter 7 to the question that's found in chapter 6 and verse 12. So next week, Lord willing, be studying chapter 7 as it relates to the question found there in verse